The next aspect, and again, this is nothing that we can prioritize, like do this first and do this next. It really depends on what this business requirement document is, the way it's written, how much details it has. Perhaps it has so little details that you constantly have to go and check with your, financial books to understand the details about some things, right? So, or it can include a lot of information, because some users like to, write a lot of details about their business knowledge, right? So it really depends. And therefore, we cannot say do it in order 1, 2, 3. It's just basically the aspects, the things that we want to be paying attention to. Another angle, so let me clean this up a little bit. Another angle that we want to pay attention to is, like I said, first is this 3-tier design, and especially the persistence tier. The next angle is we want to ultimately, basically, what is our next big stage? Our next big stage is that when we have the functional specs complete, and essentially this is our rewrite of the business requirements. What we want to do is go from business requirements to functional specification. What does all of this mean? This process of transitioning to this new version or another, this time technical documentation of the system, involves a number of things. Essentially, the questions to answer would be: who are the users, right? Who are the users? Question mark. What these users do in the system? Okay. And essentially, these two aspects combine. There could be more specific things, such as special circumstances, such as, for instance, the user can answer these questions by saying, normally, let me be careful with this. They can say, normally we do this, but sometimes we do something else, right? And that sometimes could depend on, say, you're trying to complete the sale and execute the payment, and the payment doesn't go through because a credit card cannot be accepted by the credit system, and you have to say, would you like to pay some other way, right? So if it did go through, we'll already be done with the sale, but if the credit card is rejected, then we have to do something else. Could be a cash payment, another credit card or debit card, or check, or combination, or store credit. It's all of a sudden, sometimes we have alternatives that we need to be aware of, right? So essentially, this type of set of questioning and understanding of what's going on in the course of executing these business rules is that we need to come up eventually. What we need to come up with is basically something very simple, that we recognize the user. Okay, we recognize the user. Okay, and we recognize that the user wants to do things, X, Y, Z things, X, Y, and Z, okay? And this is what this user can do to the system, okay? And sometimes normally what these bubbles represent is a set of use cases, all right? So a set of use cases is basically logging to the system, be assigned to a cash register, start sale, calculate total within the sale, process payment, right? So these are all use cases that can be recognized. And again, I'm kind of like falling over to this business requirements of a point of sale, essentially the supermarket supporting system, right? So these are the things, and so typically sometimes what's hard to do is to recognize, like, how do you separate this user from the actual system? So typically we want to observe the boundary of the system, okay? We would like to say that these things are done by our software, and we need to be pretty clear that the actual user, the person or another computer maybe that's using our system, is the outsider. It's not what we're trying to design, but we would like to provide this set of functionality which is available to this specific user, right? So we would like to analyze it, and let me then maybe push this out and just essentially create a little bit of space for what I'm trying to do right now. Okay, and essentially another thing that we would like to be aware of, or basically provide some details to moving from business requirements to functional specification, is that we want to recognize, identify, and understand the actors. The actors are actually users that are using the system. We say that essentially formal sort of like design uses the term actors rather than the users. Actors that are essentially entities, like I said, it can be another computer, it could be a person sitting behind a computer, or some kind of gadget device that is capable of doing things. And we want to be able to recognize the use cases. Use cases are basically instances of using the system. Essentially, what you have is some kind of scenario that basically says, okay, these are the circumstances that are driving the sale. This is how the sale originates. This is who does what. This is what we need to do during the execution of the sale. We need to keep track of each item. We need to get the price for each item. We need to compute the total. We need to compute the tax. We need to go over to the payment stages and so forth. Right, so we have a scenario, right? So normally use cases are driven by the scenario. That is basically a script, like a recipe of the system being used. So we have scenarios, and we have alternative scenarios. For instance, what happens when the system crashes right in the middle of it? How are we going to recover from it? What if the database connection is suddenly not available? What if we're in the middle of something and certain conditions prevent us from going forward with or what if we basically how do we process some coupons or discounts or whatever, right? There could be all kinds of conflicting sometimes things that the actual customer may agree or disagree with. Sometimes we want some extra input from the customer, like sometimes all of a sudden you're being asked for your zip code for whatever reason, but I don't know. Just like all of a sudden there is other types of things that need to be involved. Okay. So oftentimes those the main case scenario versus some alternative scenario during some use case are driven by things such as preconditions, post-conditions, and other types of information which are relevant to our business domain. So basically, transition from business requirements to functional specifications is basically identifying all of the use cases that we need to be able to support by our software. This portion of documentation or analysis that we're trying to do here is purely not object-oriented. Basically, use cases is a set of use cases, is a set of stories that you would like to write about the system, okay? And basically, these stories are written from the perspective of a particular actor or user who is trying to do something to the system, right? So it's basically, this is where this line can be drawn. An actor is an outsider doing things to the system using its interfaces, whereas the use case, or the entire set of all use cases we would like to support, is essentially all of the things that the system can do. However, things really don't mix. For instance, a store manager has to assign the cashier to a specific cash register, right? So the store manager is a different type of actor compared to the cashier. However, the store manager themselves can act as a cashier, right? So they can actually participate in the process of sales, right? So they can take over certain cash register and process sales, right? So there is a relationship between the actors, okay? And there's also, of course, sometimes a relationship between the use cases, but most of the time we want to separate use cases. For example, assigning the register or logging into the system is completely separate, different in time and space compared to, for instance, processing a sale, okay? Or maybe checking the inventory, or maybe printing the report of sales for particular day, particular cashier, particular store location, and so forth, right? So all of these things we say are separate use cases, and this is the way we want to rewrite the business requirement document so that it essentially becomes a set of these use cases, and collection of all of the use cases we would refer to as functional specification. However, like I said, these stories are written already from the technical standpoint that they're basically ready to be taken over by a programmer, and essentially they're very close to be used by a programmer so that some code can be written with respect to the use case implementation. By the way, if you're not using object-oriented technologies, right? So perhaps if you're trying to use like a C programming language, which is purely procedural, this is all you might need. Just essentially, use case description essentially tells you largely, this is what the system should do, and you decide, oh, okay, I can implement something like this with a set of C functions, and basically start writing the functions, okay? And start this type of implementation, and start testing it and going through other iterations and so forth, right? But for an object-oriented system, we would like to actually use yet one more aspect, okay? One more aspect of the, this business requirement documentation is something I would refer to as object analysis. Okay? So object analysis is essentially recognizing what could be great candidates in this business requirement to become actual objects in our business tier, in our business model. Remember, we already mentioned what we want to recognize as database record or database entity. Now, who are the actors, the users of the system? What do they do, which is a set of use cases? What scenarios are they typically using? And then, again, recognize which object would be purposeful to have, what things, what tangible, blobs of information should we be able to recognize. So that's yet another or another aspect or angle from which to look at the business requirements and take it to the next level. And the next level ultimately is this functional spec complete that you can use, that takes you much closer to begin to experiment with the code, start writing actual code, and do, take it to yet another stage.